Africa is set to be the next big thing. Agent Sita, CEO of Ernst & Young Africa, says the global question has moved from why invest in Africa to how and where. US President Barack Obama himself believes that sub-Saharan Africa can be the world's next major economic success story. Having acknowledged that the continent is home to 6 of the top 10 fastest growing countries in the world, and US exports to sub-Saharan Africa now top $21 billion a year. African individuals are also showing their mettle on the international landscape, so clearly talent and capability are to be found here. Why then aren't a significant number of African companies leading innovation and development? Why aren't African governments registering dynamic advancements in service efficiencies and delivery? Our guest this evening is well versed in the aspects of organizational development, as well as having had the privilege of working with institutions on the continent as well as in the first world. He is refreshingly candid throughout our entire conversation and is of the bold view that the biggest enemy to Africa's progression, be it in the public sector or the corporate world, is Africa itself. Rene Carayol took some time out to talk to us during his most recent visit to Botswana. He is adamant that the problem with most organizations is typically not the formulation of strategy, but the lack of attention to the cultivation of a proactive and productive corporate culture.
I'd be even firmer. I would say culture is more powerful than strategy. Yet, if I look at Africa's dilemma, we are still fixated on strategy, absolutely fixated on strategy. We did some research recently at our business school. I'm a professor at Cass Business School. We did some research recently, and we found that over 80% of organizations do nothing about their culture. And smart organizations, in fact, the most leading companies on the planet, they have realized that everybody can copy your strategy. Nobody can copy your culture. The only sustainable point of difference is your culture. So why would you do nothing with it? Why would you not move the levers of culture? And just so we're clear, my definition of culture is the way we get things done around here. The way Google does it is very different to the way Apple does it, is very different to Microsoft. They might have 3 identical strategies. The differentiator is culture. And we always say that I've seen organizations who've got a tremendous strategy and a mediocre culture. Nothing happens. I've seen organizations with an absolutely fantastic culture and a mediocre strategy. They win every time. Culture is more powerful than strategy. There's still this supposition I see right across even the leading African organizations, where they believe they can think themselves to success by the pristine, flawless strategy. And one thing we've always learned, no strategy survives contact with the enemy. Every time we start to execute, when the rubber hits the road, we find that, especially in today's fast-changing, dynamic, unforgiving marketplaces, the first thing you've got to do is move the strategy, change the strategy, tweak the strategy, refine the strategy, refresh the strategy. If you've got the right culture, your people do that automatically. If you haven't got the right culture, they will slavishly follow the strategy straight to their doom. And if we look at some of the outstanding African organizations, they've started to take the lesson of strategy. So if I tell you a story about Safari.com. Last year, May, I was in Kenya, and we had the opportunity to visit Safaricom. Safaricom, who are one of the leading mobile providers on the continent, based out of Kenya, and we had the privilege of interviewing the chief executive of Safaricom, Robert Collymore. Young, disgracefully young. I mean, under 40, smart as a tack, great leader, inspiring leader, and he got it. And we got into a conversation around diversity. That do they practice diversity? Do they practice inclusion at Safaricom? And he had the best answer I think I've ever heard about diversity in action.
Rene recounts an experience that shows how values in action can shape a progressive and inclusive culture.
So we're privileged enough to have an audience with Robert Collymore, the disgracefully young chief executive of Safaricom. And we got into the subject of diversity. Do they practice diversity? What's their stance on inclusion? And he had probably the most impressive answer I've ever heard about diversity. He talked about them realising they needed a brilliant marketeer, someone who could lead their marketing function in an increasingly competitive environment. And they decided that they didn't just need the best person available in Kenya, they wanted the best person on the continent. He sent his team out to go and find the best of the best. Eventually they found a woman, East African, Kenyan in fact, who was seen to be the best on the continent. She'd been interviewed by many of his team, and she came for the final interview. When she turned up for the final interview, she was 7 months pregnant. He offered her the job on the spot. Now, what does that do to diversity at Safaricom, and why is it important in terms of culture? Well, it's very, very simple. That was living proof, demonstrable proof that they practice diversity and inclusion. It was all about the best talent available. Forget how it's packaged, forget where it comes from, forget how it worships, forget how it lives its life. Is it the best talent available? By offering her the job, despite the fact she was 7 months pregnant, every talented woman in the locale would head towards Safaricom, knowing they're going to get a fantastic opportunity. Everyone who's talented starts to head towards Safaricom. We're living in a world now where, in a very challenging world, and the big war for talent, where I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember that when I was leaving university, the big question for me was, in the UK with 17% unemployment, give me a job please. And the only question I would ask is, how much you pay me? We have much braver and much more courageous, talented youngsters now, and they're asking different questions. And the question they're asking is, do your values match mine? What's your stance on diversity? What's your stance on the environment? What are you doing about sustainability? Most of the organisations and businesses on our continent here in Africa, they never say what their values are. And when they do, they're all the same ones with the words jumbled up. When you really mean it, as we saw with Safaricom, values in action, it differentiates you from the rest of your competition. Values and culture inextricably linked. And I still wonder why we're not addressing culture. And if I give you some other examples, and I'm lucky enough to travel around Africa and work with many different organisations. Yesterday I was in Ghana, and I spent 2 days there. I also was in Johannesburg. Today I'm here in Gaborone. And there are some striking similarities. In the UK, we say with our cousins over the water in America that we're separated by the same language. We're even more distant by totally different cultures. And we would say that the British are far too polite to be honest, and the Americans are too honest to be polite. I wonder which camp we'd put most of us Africans in. We are so dutifully polite. It takes forever to get a simple conversation going. And all the different organisations I work with, they're so polite, they're so formal, nothing ever gets done, nothing ever gets said. We now need to be a little bit more direct, snappy with our language, and inject pace into what we do. And if I exaggerate just a little, just a fraction, to describe the cultures I meet here in Africa, they're hierarchical. People are status conscious. They're very formal. They're bureaucratic. They're slow, they're timid, they're process driven, they're risk averse, they're cautious. They have the longest job titles I've ever seen anywhere. I'm senior super vice president of, forget all that, it's all about status. Nearly everyone is Mr. or Mrs. It feels like 1950s Europe.
How then can entities across the globe and locally exhibit a more winning way of doing things? Our guest puts forth the idea of risk-embracing leaders as a possible way to, as he says, drag ourselves screaming into the new age.
Let's drag ourselves screaming into the new age. We need to be faster, we need to be hungrier, we need to be more ambitious. We need to stop employing who look like us, speak like us, who are similar to us. What we actually want is difference. We're scared of difference. Can you believe after all the years of fighting to be recognised, now we're the ones who are scared of difference? Let's value that difference. If we all agree, all look alike, all went to the same college, the same school, the same university, guess what? The problem or opportunity presents itself, we think about it exactly the same, the danger of groupthink. We don't allow the people who work for us who have been educated differently, come from a different background, with a different education, to challenge us. Yet every high-performing organisation I've ever met, they're open, they're honest, they're authentic, and they want challenge. They have heated debate. There's a lot of tension. But because they have common goals and they have trust and they have collegiate behaviour, they can argue without ever falling out, and it reaches to a better outcome. If we're so polite, only good news travels upwards, and the chief executives are blissfully unaware of what actually happens in their organisation. We need cultures where people are prepared to be honest, to be challenging, to say what they really mean, leading to a better outcome. We sometimes believe that democracy and consensus is how we should run our organisations. Unfortunately not. For governments and for nations, yes, but democracy is the most inefficient form of management. It's not about being fair and just. It's about winning. It's about getting the right team, the right products, the right services. And on occasion, that needs some disagreement. And even when the leader has listened to everything, it's not take a vote. It's their judgment call as a leader. I've heard from you, I've heard from you, I've heard from you, so here's the direction we're going to go in. That's leadership. I don't see hardly any of that. Talent is not our issue anymore. We have talent. We've got young talent. We've got vibrant talent. Capability, we've got it in pockets. Where we lack is leadership and its connection to culture. Leaders shape culture. You show me a risk-embracing leader, Richard Branson, I'll show you a risk-embracing organisation, Virgin. I don't see enough risk-embracing leaders. I see strong academics who are good at theory, concept and abstract, little experience of the wide world, haven't travelled enough, and because they're really brilliantly educated and they've been around a long time, we put them at the top of the organisation. Time for a change. Time to bring some scary people into the top of our organisations. And I see some ingredients that are really working. I think those who have travelled see the world differently. They're prepared to challenge. They've seen things work in a different way elsewhere. Far too many of our organisations are still following the old civil service mentality of the 1950s, 1960s. They're too hierarchical, too formal, too afraid, too scared. Let's bring some people in who've travelled, been educated abroad and seen the stuff. We've got a whole diaspora of massively talented Africans who would love to come home. Let's encourage them to come home. When they come home, they can't go to the bottom of the organisation because they don't have 3 PhDs and haven't been around for 8 years. Let's push them up through the organisation. Use them as role models. They're more confident. They have a different language. They have a different style of working. They're risk-embracing. They're scary. They're not afraid to speak up. Let's not be scared. Let's embrace them. They are our future.
Most organizations decide what the new culture should be, then turn in a list of values to the communications or HR department with an order to tell people what the new culture is. They then cascade the message down the hierarchy and little to nothing ever changes. How then does one effectively inculcate a new culture into an organization?
We get involved in something we call a learning journey. We've taken a bunch of people in Africa, a bunch of people from Botswana in actual fact. We took them into London and we took them to visit 8 companies in 2 days. Whistle stop. We did the Apple, Google, Sky, the Royal Marines. We took them to see the best of the best in the UK. We took them to Selfridges, where they get to see different cultures, different methods of working. Most African capitals, where the big companies are based, tend to be rather small business villages where everyone knows everyone. And the best people have worked just about for everyone. Let's get people out of here to go and seeing is believing. Come out and see how other people operate. Learn from them, smell the culture, smell success, taste it. Pick up some great ideas from outside and bring them and Africanize them. Don't just pick them up and bring them here. They don't work like that. But take a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of that, a bit of that, then blow the African magic around it. There's no reason why we shouldn't have some world-leading organisations here in Africa at the moment. And if I'm focused back down to where we are in Gaborone here and Botswana, it's been 3 years since I've visited it, 3 years since I've appeared on your first issues. I'm surprised that things haven't moved as quickly as they've moved elsewhere across Africa. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. You've got a safe, secure, stable nation. Your GDP is impressive and going in the right direction. The economy stalls every now and again. In the main, it's so much better than the average African economy. Yet when I look for entrepreneurs, big business leaders, people making changes, doing things differently, fast moving, really pacey, challenging, unfortunately, I don't see it still. I still don't see it. So we've got the ingredients, we're not baking the cake. We've got talented people, well educated. The two things I see that I would really love to see more of is hunger and ambition. It's not about skills anymore. The smart organisations are hiring for attitude and training for skills. We're still stuck in the mould of what I call the 80-20 world. 80% of all training is done formally in a classroom and only 20% is on the job. If we look at the smart organisation, and I think Google is doing something amazing at the moment. Google have moved to a model they call 70-20-10. 70% on the job with the boss as the coach. They're coaching not just skills but culture. The way we get things done around here, the rules of engagement for the organisation, how you navigate this organisation successfully. 20% by a mentor, because all stats tell us that 90% of people resign from their boss, not from the organisation. The mentor ensures we don't lose talent just because they disagree with the boss, and only 10% in the classroom. What that says to Google is culture is what makes us great. We're not a search engine, we're the centre of global innovation. So in order to keep that innovation alive, we need a culture that capitalises upon, nurtures and breeds innovation.
We have the ingredients, but we are not baking the cake. Renee next contends that there has been a significant appreciation of the difference between leadership and management that Botswana is yet to catch up on.
What I still see here, especially in Bots, what I see here is rock solid processes, bureaucracy, people scared to make mistakes, blame culture, deep hierarchies, and everybody at the top of the organisation is completely status conscious. So one of the things I was working on today with a very, very talented group of people was to better understand that leadership is not management. They're totally different. Whilst management, we're trained in it, it's a skill, it's measurable. My business school is fantastic at it, and I lecture in the MSc in management. We produce lots of people to do management. Management is one size fits everyone. There's only one way to do it right. It's a relatively negative experience because management is all about ensuring the company doesn't fail. It's auditing, it's checking, it's inspecting. Here's some work I've given you to do, now I'm going to manage you. The way I manage you, I check that you're doing it, I check that you're doing it. That's not a great experience for the person who's being checked upon, but it's still vital to ensure the organisation doesn't fail. And in many respects, management held us in good stead through the deep recession. We're in a different place now, heading towards recovery. Recovery is all about the return of confidence. I would say the return of leadership. We need people to believe that the world can be better. We need them to believe that they can win. We need them to be more confident. That's all about leadership. And the big mistake I see here in Bots is there's a view that leaders are at the top of the organisation only. They're not. Everyone can be a leader if they choose to be. Leadership is an attitude and a mindset. The organisations that win, the businesses that win, are those who have leaders everywhere. The cashier at the bank, the till operator in the supermarket, the guy serving you at the petrol station. They can all be leaders. And the bit that, if we want a role model for leadership, just have a look at the mothers at home. They are stretched on tight budgets, they've got unruly kids, and yet they create cultures of success. They get the kids follow them. They discipline the kids, but there's inspiration that creates unconditional love. And our mothers at home are some of the best leaders in our society. Let's learn from them. How do they cope with such slender resources? I'll tell you how, because they inspire their kids, they discipline their kids, and they act as active role models. We shouldn't be getting this wrong.
Would the same work for the civil service? What would be your prescription for that bureaucratic body?
Every successful business and organisation, be it public sector, private sector or third sector in the world, is a combination of being performance driven or values led. Most of the businesses I'm working with in the private sector, especially in financial services, are desperate to refine their values. Over the last 5 years, the credit crunch, we saw that perhaps some of the banks had taken things a little too far in terms of performance management and the financial bonus. As they searched to get the pendulum to get back into the middle, we look to the public sector for guidance, the civil servants. They've always had strong values. They've always made a difference to the communities they serve. In many respects, people join the public sector because they care. They want to make that difference. And if we see the performance drive of the private sector with the values, leadership of the public sector, my dream is we can bring those two things together. The smart organisations should be values-led and performance-driven, not either or. I've seen some of the best organisations I've worked with have been in the public sector. I spent 3 years on the board of the Inland Revenue in the UK. I don't tell too many people that, but I spent 3 years on the board there. Talent coming out of their ears. Pace, energetic, can hold up, can match anyone in the private sector. So I don't see a big divide between the two. But you know, I told them a true story today, and it's a story I want to change of Botswana. A few years ago, I was rushing to get home and I was on a South African Airways flight back to Johannesburg. And I'd forgotten my daughter's birthday, which is as good as death for me. So I needed to get back early. So I could have got an Air Botswana flight. So we sprinted down to the offices, see if I could change my ticket. It was in and around lunchtime. Shock, horror. I walked in, no one was there in reception, expected to be served, go through to the offices. People were sleeping on their desks. I mean, sleeping on their desks, covered in a blanket. I had to check that I wasn't in a hotel. Come on. We've got to try and do things a little differently. And what I see in Botswana, the next stage of Botswana, collegiate behaviour, collaboration, nothing is best done alone anymore, teams work. The markets are too fast and too unforgiving for anyone to think they can do it on their own. No leader can do it on their own. We need a team. But that means we've got to get rid of this individual spirit that sometimes holds bots in fantastic... When we saw the 2012 Olympics, we saw some fabulous individuals. But individuals within a team. You can have your differences, but you're part of a team. You get to the top of your function or your department or your business unit because you're brilliant at that discipline. In that domain, you're fabulous. But when you get to the top team in the organisation, the top executive team or the board of directors, your team becomes your secondary team. The primary team is the top team. That's where your focus is, and the top team, their responsibility is the day-to-day running of the organisation. And everybody has a voice. If you've got nothing to say when we're talking about the big opportunities or issues at the organisation at large, and the only time you speak is when they talk about your area, you shouldn't be up there. You must not be up there.
Having enlightened us on the inextricable relationship between culture and values and culture and leadership, our guest is now clearly advocating for the facilitation of a team mentality. How do we go about promoting a culture of teamwork in both our private and public institutions?
I think the next stage here, for the public sector, private sector or third sector, let's get rid of status. Let's be less formal. Let's call each other by our first names. Let's not have private named car parking spaces for everyone. Let's not have deep hierarchies. Let's try and move a little quicker. Remove the bureaucracy. The house style here is still all delegation. Now, delegation 10 years ago, we thought, magic, this is the way forward. But delegation is too slow in our fast-moving world. Delegation is a lack of trust. Here's a few tasks I want you to go and do. When you finish them, come back to me so I can check you've done them properly. Now here's some more tasks. That's too long, too slow. We now need freedom within a framework. It's empowerment. Empowerment creates speed. Empowerment is all about doing things in a way we've never done them before. But it takes leadership and it takes trust.
I did say that tonight's conversation would be a thought-provoking one. What are your views? Join the conversation on our Facebook, YouTube and Twitter page. From me, Nameto Sibina, the team behind First Issues, and our sponsors, First National Bank, we wish you a good night and pleasant viewing.